Hello and welcome back, and that is right. Today we're going to answer a nice and simple question. Should you go for a DIY solution or should you go for a Synology or a QNAP? In this video I'm going to delve into 5 reasons why going for a DIY ground up solution that you decide the parts for, you put together, you pick your open source software and ultimately you build from the ground up, or you go for a Synology or QNAP solution, and again, ASUS and TerraMaster as well, but we're going to focus a lot more on Synology and QNAP in this video. Should you go for one of their solutions where, you just switch it on and it's good to go? There's lots of reasons for one or the other, but ultimately different users require different things, and both of these architectures have their own strengths and weaknesses. So we're going to do 5 for this, 5 for this, and hopefully by the end of this video, you'll know which pathway is best for you.
You know, nothing about memory or RAM.
Memory is RAM.
Let's be honest, it's the big one, it's the most obvious one, but going DIY can work out so much lower in cost. You've got to factor in all the parts, of course, your PSUs, your CPUs and your motherboards, but ultimately when you piece the bits together, you end up saving an absolute packet compared to the hardware you get from Synology and QNAP. It's always been a long-running thing. It's always been the case for the last 10-20 years of server ownership that is the true thing. To put into a bit of perspective, we're doing our John's Bow N3 video. This is the motherboard we've ordered for it here, and this motherboard here is a 12th gen i9 micro ITX motherboard, an MITX here. It's got 3 M2 slots, 1 on the rear, it's got 2 on the front, and it includes that CPU. And this set us back just between 200 to 300 nicker, depending on the configuration we wanted of the inclusive CPU. We still got to get a fan, we still got to get the memory, we still got to get the case and the PSU, but right now, if you want an i9 12th gen processor inside a NAS, the only option I can see on the market is from QNAP, and that is in their 7.4 series, and that NAS will set you back 2 to 3 grand. To dig a little deeper into this, let's hop to the laptop, and there you go. That is the motherboard I just showed you, 303 nicker for an i9 12th gen CPU equipped motherboard straight out the gate. And we look on the left hand side, there's your TVS H74X knocking around for 3 grand for a not dissimilar CPU. But when you dig down into the likes of AliExpress and you find the number of motherboards with a CPU included, and that's just looking at i9s, you can go for an 11th gen i9 for 150 quid, and that's 150 quid for both the motherboard and the CPU included there. Yes, it's an 8 core, so it has scaled down ever so slightly, but it's still a decent enough CPU. And if you go for some of the top 10 series that we talked about before, you can get yourself everything from a Celeron to that early Pentium N6005, and it's only a question of time before we start seeing the likes of the N100 and more appearing on this platform. Once you really break it down to getting hold of cases, not just the John's Bow, but if you put in NAS case there are just lots of cheap little options out there that allow you to save an absolute packet. Yes, you have to go ahead and buy the likes of the CPU, heatsink, the PSU, and all the other components in between, and of course put it all together. More on that later on, but there is simply no denying it is almost comical how cheap DIY NASs are when you compare them to turnkey solutions.
You know, nothing about memory or RAM.
Memory is RAM.
Then there's simply a case of the freedom you have in your operating system there. When you go for DIY solutions, a big appeal for a lot of users out there is the access to a lot of open source software. You can go completely free and utterly open source, utilizing the likes of TrueNASCAL or TrueNASCore, as well as, lesser used ones such as Open Media Vault. Then you've got your slightly paid for ones like your Unraid, which we've talked about on the platform quite a few times recently, that although has an early licensing system in place, it's not that expensive, and it allows you to take advantage of quite a lot of bare metal container level access, while at the same time having a relatively straightforward GUI compared to the likes of TrueNAS and more. Now, when you look at Synology with Disk Station Manager, and you look at QNAP with QTS and QUTS, yes, they are very good platforms, but you are paying for that being built in, and in most cases, and definitely in the case of those two brands, slightly less so with your TerraMasters and your Acer stores, I should say, you can't use third third-party OSs. They either have systems in place that completely restrict it to be something you can be done, or that by putting a third-party OS on those systems, it can completely invalidate your support and warranty moving forward. Now again, I mentioned TerraMaster and Acer Store there because they do support the use of third-party OSs to a point. They won't stop you doing it, but it will limit your support options. They won't just completely shut the door on you. But in the case of Synology and QNAP, if you bung on a third-party OS, they completely deaf ears you. So do bear in mind that going DIY does open the door to a lot of diversity and kind of more choice in terms of the operating systems that you want to run around your network attached storage.
You know, nothing about memory or RAM.
Memory is RAM.
This next point kind of alludes back to what I was talking about with that motherboard there when we were sort of scouring around AliExpress there earlier on. And that is quite simply that when it comes to using third-party OSs and using DIY NAS solutions, the level of customization and flexibility in terms of power consumption, in terms of compaction, large scale, is just huge. The level of customization available to you, rather than turnkey NAS solutions, Synology and QNAP, where you are normally locked in the architecture pretty much exclusively, not only within utilizing certain product families such as Synology with their series of Intel or AMD powered systems there, where they use a very similar hardware architecture across the entire range, and you end up with, although Synology's portfolio has something in the region of 30 to 40 solutions at any given time across all of the ranges, which are refreshed periodically, generally their hardware architectures can be broken down to about 5 or 6 different configurations of CPU, memory, ports and connectivity that are then lightly expanded or contracted upon in terms of memory or ports and connectivity across those larger ranges. QNAP are a little bit more evolved in terms of the port connections and hardware architecture across their whole range, but still nevertheless, when it comes to the scale, the configurations inside and out of Synology and QNAP, there is not the same level of customization and kind of easing outwards in terms of storage expandability in the number of bays, the amount of power consumption, and of course the power and depth of the components you use in a DIY solution is just, it's infinite, frankly, compared to Synology and QNAP there. And if you have a very bespoke setup, if you have a setup where you are slightly more preoccupied with power consumption, you are slightly more occupied more towards storage capacity than you are over power, the level of flexibility you have to what you can do with your budget is incalculably higher on a DIY solution.
You know, nothing about memory or RAM.
Memory is RAM.
This next one, I actually debated for a while personally whether this could go under the heading of good or bad in favour of DIY, but on the whole, in the grand scheme of things, I think it is a positive, and that is, when it comes to DIY solutions, there is virtually no artificial limitations in the hardware you can use. What do I mean by that? Well, when it comes to buying your motherboard and your CPU, obviously there are physical limitations. You can't lamp in a CPU that's got a different socket configuration into a different motherboard. Same goes if you're going to be using a system like these that utilize MITX boards, you can't get away with an ATX board, or even worse still, just a standard ATX board, not even an MATX board. They're just not going to physically fit. So there are, of course, physical limitations there in place. But when it comes to software limitations, when it comes to support and warranty limitations, things are substantially looser. On these systems, for example, they have SATA/SAS ports in most cases, and in that there's no limit to what hard drives I can use. If it can physically fit, chances are it's going to appear. If I want to use 20 or 22 TB drives, slam them in, I'm good to go. If I want to use drives from some Eastern unknown brand that's popped up on AliExpress for 9 days, I can use them. Or if I want to use WD drives and I want to use Seagate SSDs and I want to use Intel NICs inside these systems, I don't have to consort to a curated compatibility list from the manufacturers of the case to tell me what I can and cannot do. And that's something that in the last 18 months or so, very much in the case of Synology, slightly lesser so in the case of QNAP, we have seen, for example, that a lot of their hard drive compatibility changed quite dramatically across their ranges, and users, for example, looking at 22 TB drives, right now I don't think there is a single Synology system that lists 22 TB drives on their compatibility listing, even though myself and many other platforms have confirmed support and compatibility for those 22 TB drives. There is more than enough evidence out there that you can use 22 TB drives on a Synology system, yet nevertheless, they're not on their compatibility listing. We're not just talking about me. Storage Review themselves regularly test 22 TB drives in their reviews, and we've still not seen them appear on the compatibility listing. So I don't think we can say it is a difficulty of the software, it is an incompatibility, it's just a lack of adding them to that list. And then when you take it one step further and you look at a lot of the more high profile systems, that when you use drives that aren't on that official compatibility list, then present a warning to you saying, by the way, you're using incompatible drives. The level of that will differ brand to brand, OS to OS, but still nonetheless, it's the fact that it is there at all. Now, on top of that, you've got things like memory compatibility, because let's face it, when you look at QNAP, you look at Synology, and you look at their memory upgrades, and you go for the branded ones, they cost more. They just simply cost more. There is the excuse that Synology and QNAP do test them, and they want to make sure that very specific memory that they have done testing on runs across their systems, and there must be some validity to that. But nevertheless, when you go for a DIY system, you are not locked in terms of the memory upgrades. And again, that expands across the whole system. And time again, when you look at DIY versus Synology and QNAP, and of course the other NAS brands as well, you will always find that support, compatibility, and supported compatible hardware lists are hugely more expanded across, or more importantly, less restricted on the DIY platform there. It can lead to incompatibility, it can lead to inconsistency, it can lead to not knowing what parts work on these systems, hence why I wavered about which side of the list these would go on. But I think on the whole there are users that enjoy the more open kind of resource sandbox of compatibility on DIY than there is on Synology and QNAP.
You know, nothing about memory or RAM.
Memory is RAM.
This last one's a bit spurious, and I know there's going to be some of you that are going to debate me on this, but I'll be straight with you. DIY NAS is fun. Let's face it, if you are a NAS enthusiast, and let's face it, look at the YouTube channel you're watching, mate. If you are an enthusiast towards storage and you're not just pursuing this subject because you need to store a million squillion photos, you need to do some editing for your other job, for this other industry you give a crap about. If you're not that and you're actually centered and interested in storage and technology, DIY NAS can be incredibly fun. It gives you a good understanding about how systems work. It helps you and educates you on a lot of command line. It helps you learn about the capabilities of storage, and data can be more than just a simple bit of SSD that just sits there on a desk getting access from time to time. You learn there is more to it than that. You learn there are nuances. You learn the capabilities and the way you can make the data actually work to your benefit, not just live there and put back when you need it. So when it comes to going DIY, you get to learn a lot more about storage, and it is genuinely fun when you really get into it. There are whole communities, subreddits, websites, not just here, that cover this subject. There is clearly an intrigue and interest behind it, whereas although that still can be said to exist for your Synologies and your QNAPs, because it's a locked ecosystem, all too often what you learn within those ecosystems lives within those ecosystems, because you have to work in a certain way. In the same way, if you are an avid Windows user, when you start using a Mac, you are scratching your head and getting frustrated within about 4 minutes, and the same is vice versa true, because you are locked in to their ecosystem. DIY goes a few steps below that into the open area of field of Linux, open area of field of storage, ZFS, BTRFS, and ext4, and ultimately DIY NAS ends up being a much more engaging platform for those that like to get the silicon paste underneath their fingertips. Just bear in mind that it is by no means a perfect platform, and there is a damn good reason I have been talking about the likes of Synology and QNAP on this channel for a long time. So although I've said 5 lovely things about going full DIY, let's face it, it ain't perfect. Here are the 5 reasons why Synology and QNAP may very well still be the best option for you.
If you type Google into Google, you can break the internet.
I genuinely cannot stress how much easier going Synology and QNAP is compared to those. Seriously, I may have said it's fun, I may have said you've got flexibility, but man alive, when it comes to setting up the device for the first time, accessing it, getting the system to do what you want to do, and you don't want to spend a lot of time learning and don't want to spend a lot of time putting in obscure commands into SSH, trust me, Synology and QNAP with DSM and QTS and QUTS absolutely rule the roost. Let's jump to the laptop. Even if you were prepared to overlook the fact that most turnkey NAS solutions like a Synology or a QNAP can be booted up straight out the box and, customized very, very easily out the gate with user-friendly controls, that is doubled down upon when you get into the GUI of things like DSM, QTS, QUTS, and particularly when you compare these desktops here, which look incredibly user-friendly and familiar to Mac, Windows and Android users, but when you compare them against TrueNAS, which is a great deal more text-based and very intimidating, and again, whether you go core or scale, it's still going to be the case, or if you make your way into something like Unraid, all of these just seem very intimidating straight out of the bat, but it doesn't get much easier, because although I would argue Unraid is definitely the more user-friendly compared with things like TrueNAS, I would still say it is nothing like using DSM or QUTS or QTS. For example, I want to browse my files. Well, I'm just going to go to their very own file manager, and I can use this to access not only standard files, but whatever I want to use for more targeted storage in the case of LUNs, and on top of that, utilising it with a bunch of applications not dissimilar to installing them on your standard Windows or Mac operating system. Now, if we do look at the likes of Unraid, of course, you can use the App Center to install apps. Indeed, I've utilised this to install a whole bunch of different plugins and applications and extras, but by no means is it handled as user-friendly. It's still more user-friendly than something like TrueNAS using jails, but still nonetheless, whether we look at something like Nerd Tools, for example, which provides us with a huge range of tools and options and services that we can use on our Unraid server. Again, it is fantastic. We can use all these. But I think you would be mad to tell me that this looks user-friendly. Because yes, if I dig straight in and zoom and I can find out some of these are to do with deduplication, some of them are to do with services, some of them to do with support options and software, but still nonetheless, that is incredibly intimidating. Compare that with just going to the App Center here on a Synology or QNAP NAS. I can just go in and I can just download them, update them when I need them, and there's a lot of first-party stuff there, something I'll touch on later on, that just makes the whole dang thing easier. Same goes for QNAP, with QNAP having a larger extension towards third-party applications, but still a lot of first-party applications included too. The whole thing just feels a great deal more user-friendly and easy to use overall. And if that's what you're looking for in your data storage, something to set up and forget, but also when you do dip in, not have any kind of high-scaled learning curve, these very well be the much better option for you than using something like Unraid, where even creating the main storage can be a little bit intimidating, and certainly more intimidating on something like TrueNAS. But again, when you make your way into DSM, you make your way into QTS, it is hand-holdy, it is incredibly straightforward, and things look like what I want them to look like when I want to create storage, what I want to see. It's that straightforward. If I want to create storage, I can drag and drop. It's that easy to use. And ultimately, that's why Synology, DSM, and QNAP, QTS, and just the systems in general are always going to be a great deal more user-friendly, because things feel a little bit more intuitive and graphical and hand-holdy overall.
If you type Google into Google, you can break the internet.
And I mentioned this earlier on. Do you remember when I talked about support and I talked about compatibility? Well, let's say that word, warranty. If you're someone that cares about warranty, or you care about buying a thing that has at least a guarantee in some form that it is definitely going to work to the very best of its abilities, to the way the brand says, for the extended length of time, turnkey NAS, hands down the better option. Whenever you look at DIY level solutions, in some component cases, you will get longer warranties. In some cases, you might get 1 or 2 years, depending on some components and the brand you buy them from. You might get those extra bit of warranty you can lump on there, but still nonetheless, you have to have individual warranties for a lot of those components. And when we were looking at some of those built up boards, like the one I mentioned earlier on, that has got a 1 year guarantee on it, and even then it's 30 days of return policy there, and even then we're dealing with AliExpress, we're dealing with overseas, and a lot of the time getting support to replacement warranties, RMAs, are a mess. And even if you go to retailers in your own region, you're still looking at a different warranty for the CPU, the motherboard, the PSU, any update cards, all the way through the system, and that is going to be a nightmare. Also, when a lot of those warranties are going to be different lengths, and when you do have an issue, you have to troubleshoot all to hell to know which of the components it was that's actually causing the problem, so you can try and claim on that warranty. In the case of turnkey, one warranty. Now, yes, the hard drives of the SSDs you use inside, say like a QNAP, they are a different warranty, but still nonetheless, every other component is a single warranty. And if you go one step further and you look at Synology's, and again, this kind of leans a little bit on what I mentioned earlier on about compatibility and support, Synology have rolled out their own branded SSDs and hard drives. And in that case, you can genuinely get a solution that has got one warranty for everything of 3 to 5 years. That is saving you a lot of hassle, and if you do encounter a problem, it doesn't matter if it's the CPU, the motherboard, the hard drives, the SSD, the external PSU, it's still one warranty covering it all, and that can save you so much time, so much lost productivity, and ultimately result in a smoother, less stressful experience going Synology or QNAP than going DIY.
If you type Google into Google, you can break the internet.
This next one, we'll hop on the laptop in a second, but before we go there, let's hit the nail on the head. Going for a Synology or QNAP isn't just about that hardware and that DSM QTS type stuff I talked about, but also the sheer range of first-party client apps that are included with it is insanity, and there is no third-party option out there that provides the same level of inclusive first-party client applications for desktop, PC, Mac, Ubuntu, but also for your mobiles, your iPhone, your Android. The sheer range of tools open to you is insane, and I know a number of you might be thinking, well, I'm not going to use those tools. Let's hop onto the laptop and let me give you some perspective. Let's say you want to access your Synology NAS remotely using your iPhone. Well, there is a whole bunch of Synology applications for accessing a Synology NAS via your iPhone in a tailored way. Do you want to access photos? Do you want to access videos? Do you want to access your surveillance cameras? Do you want to, have some communication between all of your devices? Do you want to be able to create shared drives for all of those services to support all different kinds of data? Or do you simply want to go for file folder management? You can do that. The same goes if you want to access from your desktop. You've got a whole range of desktop tools here that you can install on Windows or Mac or Linux systems to access the data on your NAS in a tailored first-party way. The same goes for QNAP. They have a whole range of applications for iOS and Android, all of which can be accessed very, very easily either by Google Play, the iTunes App Center, either on Apple's platform, or you can download all of them as APKs and QPKs on their own websites. Now, again, if you are using TrueNAS, Unraid or whatever, there's not a huge range of first-party tools, and in most cases you'll be relying on using very popular third-party tools. Again, your Nextcloud, your own cloud, using VLC for example, or MX Player, or more recently PhotoPrism for AI photo recognition on your services. However, those are third-party tools and they're not developed specifically for the platform Unraid or TrueNAS that you are using, and in a lot of cases require a lot more tweaking, understanding a lot of the IP and configuration settings, and can again take more time and a little bit more hassle. And on top of that, because the likes of TrueNAS and Unraid are, kind of funded in a slightly different way, and they don't get the revenue stream that the likes of going for a hardware and software combined solution bring to the brand, the result is that the amount of funding the likes of Unraid and TrueNAS have to spend on first-party client applications is going to be limited, not only to develop the apps, but to maintain those apps long-term. Ultimately, if what you are looking for is a range of tools to interact with your data, not just on a backup or bog-standard level, but going deeper into the client applications and having a much faster, efficient and tailored access to the data, that is where client tools for your devices are going to be paramount.
If you type Google into Google, you can break the internet.
Now, this next point I know is going to spark debate.
Move this man! Move!
I also know that it is not a conclusive hot or cold argument here. There is a lot of grey in between. But in many, many ways, turnkey NAS solutions have a larger degree of safety for novice users in a way that DIY and build your own solutions simply don't. Now, again, let's be honest about and realistic about this. It's none of these arguments are bulletproof. Let's face it, when QNAP was hit by Deadbolt and QLocker and other ransomware applications, they come under a lot of scrutiny, and therefore there is clearly undermining and clearly arguments against the security of turnkey solutions where users are a little bit more blasé about the applications and services they use and the things they leave open on a turnkey NAS solution, where when it comes to a DIY, it forces you in most cases to have to set up the system in an unsafe way in order to get hit, particularly in the case of things like TrueNAS, where it uses that jail system, and it is pretty, strict about the access being provided to any individual jail or general application running therein, that you have to really go out of your way to set it. However, I think we do have to at least acknowledge that because turnkey NAS solutions are developing all of their apps in-house and all of those applications and services are managed by them within that ecosystem, and therefore forcing less reliance on third-party tools, it allows them to shut a lot of doors when it comes to external accessing via third-party apps that may have slightly wonky PHP, that may have back-end access being given to those that then grant access to the individual system. And if you want to use those tailored apps, turnkey NAS solutions will give you those first-party apps within that single ecosystem, allowing a greater degree of control within the developer of the system to stop that outside access. Obviously, it's not foolproof. Look at Deadbolt, but at the same time, look at Synology. They have not been hit in any meaningful way for a very long time, upwards of a decade now, which in cyber security circles and particularly in data storage circles is an exceptionally long time. Now, again, if you go for an Unraid or TrueNAS based system or the other OSs out there, yeah, you're right. The individual core system itself, if you use only the first-party apps and services that are available, which there are not loads, you are really lowering your attack vectors. But because of the reliance on a lot of third-party tools to do similar things that you might get on a turnkey NAS solution, you are now relying on lots of different brands and their own apps and their own security fixes and development to stay safe, and therefore you're more reliant on restricting access to the data for those apps than you are allowing them to have access, because you can trust the overarching ecosystem. But again, this is not a black and white option, hence why I debated about this point, much like before with support, whether I was going to put it on the good side of it. I think on the whole, for the novice user, it works out better.
If you type Google into Google, you can break the internet.
This last point, when it comes to turnkey NAS, is one of these ones that I think isn't really visible unless you look at the larger strength and length of time, and that is that when it comes to turnkey NAS solutions, again, because when they're being purchased, it's a combination hardware and software, and therefore the amount of money being spent on them, and therefore the budget allocation is bigger. Development and innovations within the world of turnkey NAS solutions are often substantially bigger and more recurring than they are in the DIY sector. Now, to put that into perspective, TrueNAS, when TrueNAS arrived with TrueNAS Core is phenomenal in terms of data management, data security, and just general packaging of data in the most efficient, best way possible. But they had to roll out TrueNAS Scale because of the popularity of Linux-based OSs that were out there that allowed you to do more. When you go to TrueNAS Core, for example, there's no native file browser. Now, when you go into TrueNAS Scale, it's really easy to bung on a native file browser really easily on there, which is lovely stuff. But that is something that's been available in standard class NAS for decades. And when you look at Unraid has, that great parity RAID system based on its own math calculation, but it isn't until recently, with very recent innovations of implementing an area of flash or utilising new and a more recent support of ZFS, that we've started to see Unraid kind of give any meaningful performance benefits of having multiple drives in an array. Turnkey NAS solutions have been doing that for decades, and on top of that, a lot of that money that's gone into these systems and integrating and innovating within them has, those, call them limitations, call them barriers, call them pathways to work within. The result is we've seen hardware innovations such as combo cards, single PCIe cards that have got 2 or more, in some cases, M2 NVMe bays and 10GBE ports. There's a Gen 4 version of this card that's got 4 M2 NVMe slots, Gen 4, and 2 10GBE slots. It's a Gen 4 x 16 card, takes up 1 slot, and you've got an enormous amount of potential. Same goes for the Mustang Performance Upgrade cards. Synology have got their own combo card, which arguably is even better in terms of hardware architecture, although it is Gen 3 and not Gen 4. Then you look at things like Thunderbolt NAS. The ability to have a NAS system, sure, 10GBE, 25 and 100 gig cards are out there, but the system of QNAP having not only Thunderbolt NASes, it's Thunderbolt 3 and 4 that allow you to directly, point to point with Thunderbolt, connect with a NAS and at the same time use it as a 10G Thunderbolt network adapter. But on top of that, they even released a Celeron powered version. In 2017 to 18, they released a Celeron powered Thunderbolt and 10G NAS for about 980 Nika, which is a joke how innovative that is within the industry. Then you move on to the likes of Synology, and I'm even going to give TerraMaster a shout here, for having flexible RAID configurations that allow you to mix and match the drives that you use. That's right, so rather than be locked in, as you find with TrueNAS, where every drive has to be the same capacity, or Unraid, where you can have mixed drives but you don't get the performance benefits without taking advantage of some of those SSD caching options, Synology and indeed TrueNAS have flexible RAID systems that allow you on day one to have maybe a couple of 4TBs, and you can add 6s, add 8s, add 10s later, and take advantage of that extra capacity in a way that a traditional RAID configuration will limit every single drive that's added to the smallest capacity. Not very useful on day one, but 3 to 5 to 6 to 10 years down the line, that's going to be beneficial. Then you've got things from other brands like Asustor's Flash Store. Sure, they weren't the first to release an M2 NVMe powered NAS, but to have a 450 Nika NAS that's got 6 M2 NVMe bays, a couple of 2.5 gig ports there on the rear, Celeron powered, yeah, sure, it doesn't have ECC, yeah, sure, it's not a Xeon, but to have access to that kind of technology in a pre-made system like that for 450 Nika, including the software and all of those apps that we just talked about, come on, that's pretty good. And then you move to the other end of the spectrum where things like this 10GBE adapter from Synology. Synology are one of the few brands out there that rather than just providing you 10GBE upgrade cards in a big PCIe card, this is literally an inject. It's a module, you pop it in the back and you've got 10GBE. It's that straightforward. Innovations like those couldn't be born in a DIY NAS only world, because DIY NAS, the money that is being generated is separated to different vendors of the hardware. The hardware is not being built at the same time as the software, or at least in conjunction with it, and ultimately it means that that innovation is detrimentally stagnated by each of those brands only working within their lanes with smaller amounts of budget. Turnkey NAS solutions, because it's all going into the same pot, that innovation can happen. Is it cheap? God no. Is it to everyone's liking? Seriously not. But there are always benefits in terms of innovation within the industry when you have turnkey NAS solutions where it's all in one, and therefore it can develop and flourish within that. And then you have brands like QNAP that not only then release these solutions within their ecosystem, but then they make them PC compatible, they make them Mac compatible, they make them Linux compatible. This is a USB to 5 gigabit adapter there. They've even got their own Thunderbolt to 10G adapter. It's not just for QNAP. You can use it on PC, you can use it on all of those third-party OSs. You can even use a lot of that hardware, like this card, I can use in both TrueNAS and in Unraid. They're not going to stop me. It's not against the warranty. I can use it. Those innovations that then benefit the DIY sector came from turnkey. So there is simply no denying that turnkey NAS solution is where the innovation within the server industry can often be found, and it is because of the way that model and the hardware pricing and software structure exists. But Did this video help you choose between building your own NAS or going turnkey? I really hope it did. I know this is a subject we talk about a lot, and a lot of you are going to take to the comments to tell me why I am wrong. Just remember, everything's got a point of view. Everyone's right, but at the same time, everyone's wrong. So let me know what you think, but just bear in mind that you're not the only person in the world, and people approach this subject in very different ways. So when you go to the comments, just give that thought in your head, then start typing your comment. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this. If you need help choosing the right DIY solution for yourself, not only have I linked to our build guides below where we've gone through several different configurations that go 250, 500 and 750 to 1000 nicker, each one of them very elaborate indeed. But on top of that, we've got links to buyer's guides for turnkey NAS solutions below as well. If you're still in the dark, use the free advice section over on NAScompares, the big blue button on the right hand side of the screen, as well as utilising the Ask NAScompares community forum, the Discord, or head over to Ko-Fi and Patreon to take advantage of some of our membership tiers. We get expedited support, access to our monthly Zooms and seminars, and access to our content polls and further updated support guides and access to videos earlier than anyone else. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.